Let's set the scene. Minneapolis, January 2026. The city, usually blanketed in quiet snow and shimmering lights, was anything but peaceful. Instead of the usual winter calm, a storm of a different kind was brewing. The air was electric, charged with anticipation and anxiety, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Instead of peaceful, snowy streets, the city was rocked by protests, sirens, and chaos. The sound of shattering glass and distant shouting echoed through neighborhoods that, just days before, had been silent under a blanket of snow. Flashing lights painted the city in red and blue, illuminating faces filled with fear, anger, and determination. Minneapolis, already familiar with unrest, became the epicenter of national attention once again. News crews from across the country set up outside government buildings, their cameras capturing every tense moment. Reporters huddled in the cold, broadcasting live updates as the world watched the city's every move. The air was thick with anger and division, not just cold. People from all walks of life gathered, their breath visible in the frigid air, their voices rising in unison. The city's winter chill was nothing compared to the icy tension between protesters and authorities. Federal law enforcement, specifically ICE, faced off against furious protesters. Lines of officers in tactical gear stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces set and unreadable, as crowds surged forward demanding answers and justice. The standoff was tense, with neither side willing to back down. Police cars were smashed, graffiti-covered vehicles, and riot gear lined the streets. The aftermath of each night's confrontation was visible in the morning light, shattered glass, scorched debris, and the lingering scent of smoke. The city's infrastructure, like its people, was under siege. This wasn't a random outburst. It was the boiling point of long-simmering tensions. Years of frustration, distrust, and unresolved grievances had finally erupted. For many, this was about more than a single incident. It was about a system that felt broken, and a community desperate to be heard. A massive fraud scandal had already brought federal agents to the city, setting the stage for conflict. The investigation had exposed deep-rooted issues, and the presence of federal authorities only heightened the sense of unease. Rumors and speculation swirled, fueling the anger on the streets. The protests that erupted mid-January were a direct response to tragic events involving those agents. News of a confrontation gone wrong spread like wildfire, igniting outrage and sorrow. The city's pain became a rallying cry, drawing thousands into the streets night after night. Immigration, policing, and federal power collided, turning a local story into a national flashpoint. Debates raged not just in Minneapolis but across the country as people grappled with questions of justice, accountability, and the role of government in their lives. Minneapolis became a mirror for America's deepest divisions, a city caught between hope and despair, unity and conflict. As the snow continued to fall, the world watched, wondering what would happen next in this not-so-average winter wonderland. Let's talk about ICE. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Their job: enforce immigration laws and investigate cross-border crime. For critics, ICE is the face of harsh immigration policies, raids, deportations, and family separations. The Abolish ICE movement sees them as enforcers of a broken system. Supporters, meanwhile, view ICE agents as patriots protecting the country. The agency's presence in Minneapolis wasn't neutral. It was loaded with political and emotional baggage. For some, ICE meant federal overreach and fear. For others, it meant law and order. This clash of perceptions fueled the volatility in the city. ICE agents weren't just officers, they were symbols of a national divide. That's why their arrival was a spark in a powder keg. The spark that ignited everything: the death of Renee Good on January 7th. She was shot and killed by an ICE officer during a protest. Authorities claim she used her car as a weapon, forcing the officer to act in self-defense. Supporters called it a justified shooting. Critics called it murder. Activists and politicians demanded transparency, questioning the official story. Was Renee fleeing, or was she a threat? The truth was hotly contested. Her death became a rallying cry, transforming protests into a crusade for justice. Vigils and memorials sprang up, and anger intensified. Two competing narratives, heroic officer or trigger-happy agent, set the stage for explosive confrontations. 1 week later, things escalated. An ICE agent, attempting to arrest a suspect, was reportedly ambushed and injured. The agent fired back, wounding a suspect who was then hospitalized. Law enforcement saw this as proof that anti-ICE rhetoric had turned violent. Protesters doubted the official story, suspecting a botched arrest. Instead of calming tensions, this second shooting hardened both sides. Any hope for de-escalation vanished. The White House wasted no time blaming Democrats for the chaos. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt accused Democratic leaders of fueling violence with anti-ICE rhetoric. She argued that extreme language from politicians and media encouraged attacks on law enforcement. The administration claimed local leaders made federal agents vulnerable by refusing to cooperate. This deflected responsibility and rallied their base, framing the crisis as a battle between law and order and lawlessness. The message: Democrats created the environment for violence. The media was also blamed for biased coverage. The White House turned a local crisis into a national political showdown. The narrative was clear. This was a fight for the soul of the country. President Trump raised the stakes by threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act. This rare law allows the president to deploy the military on U.S. soil during civil unrest. Trump warned Minnesota leaders, "Stop the chaos, or he'd send in troops." The Insurrection Act is a last resort tool, used only in extreme crises. Its mention signaled the administration saw Minneapolis as a rebellion, not just unrest. The White House confirmed the threat was real, leaving the red line undefined. Suddenly the conflict wasn't just local, it was a showdown between federal and state power. The possibility of military intervention against American citizens became a real chilling prospect. The stakes had never been higher. The crisis that erupted in Minneapolis quickly spiraled beyond the city's borders, transforming into a nationwide contest of blame and accusation. What began as a local tragedy soon became a flashpoint for deep-seated tensions simmering across the country. As images of unrest and protest filled television screens and social media feeds, Americans everywhere found themselves drawn into a heated debate over who was truly responsible. The White House, seizing the moment, pointed fingers at Democratic leaders, accusing them of stoking chaos and failing to support law enforcement. Administration officials appeared on news programs, insisting that a lack of order was the direct result of partisan politics and weak leadership in cities like Minneapolis. Meanwhile, protesters and their supporters countered with their own accusations. They argued that federal agencies, especially ICE and the administration, had escalated tensions by responding with excessive and sometimes deadly force. For many, the government's actions were not about restoring peace, but about silencing dissent and intimidating communities. Supporters of law enforcement rallied in defense of the police, highlighting the dangers officers faced on the front lines. They pointed to violent clashes and attacks on police as proof that a dangerous anti-police sentiment was taking hold, threatening the safety of both officers and the public. Each side dug in, convinced of their own righteousness. Protesters saw themselves as fighting for justice and accountability, while police supporters believed they were defending order and the rule of law. Both groups felt under siege, certain that they were the true victims in a struggle for America's soul. As the rhetoric intensified, compromise became a distant dream. Politicians, pundits, and everyday citizens alike refused to yield any ground, fueling a cycle of accusation and outrage that seemed to have no end. The story was quickly reduced to a battle of good versus evil, with each side casting the other as the villain. Nuance and empathy were lost in the noise, replaced by slogans and sound bites that left little room for understanding. Political polarization turned a moment of national tragedy into a fierce battleground, where every action and statement was scrutinized and weaponized for partisan gain. The media, politicians, and activists all played their part, amplifying divisions and fueling the fire. News coverage became a battleground of its own, with competing narratives vying for attention and allegiance. Minneapolis, once just another American city, was transformed into a symbol of the nation's deepest divisions. Its streets became a stage for a much larger drama, reflecting the anger, fear, and hope of millions. The lines were drawn more sharply than ever before. Barricades, both physical and ideological, separated Americans from one another, making compromise seem not just unlikely, but impossible. Across the country, people watched the events unfold, some with anger, others with fear, and many with a sense of helplessness. The nation was transfixed and divided, as the conflict in Minneapolis raged on, echoing far beyond the city's borders. Local leaders in Minneapolis and Minnesota were trapped between furious residents and federal pressure. Their communities demanded they stand up to ICE and protect protesters. At the same time, they were responsible for public safety amid violence and destruction. The White House accused them of failing their duties and threatened military intervention. Cracking down risked betraying their base. Doing nothing risked federal takeover. Their statements tried to balance empathy and authority, but satisfied no one. The breakdown between city, state, and federal agencies was stark. Local leaders faced attacks from both their constituents and the highest office in the land. It was a no-win situation, highlighting the dysfunction in American governance. After the chaos, what's left? The streets are quieter now, but the silence is heavy, filled with questions that have no easy answers. The city bears the scars of unrest, shattered glass, boarded windows, and the lingering sense that something fundamental has shifted. Minneapolis stands at a crossroads, and so does the nation. Minneapolis was a snapshot of a divided America, where trust in government is dangerously low. The city became a symbol, not just of pain and protest, but of a deeper fracture running through the country. People looked at the same events and saw entirely different stories, shaped by their own fears and hopes. The threat to use the Insurrection Act set a chilling precedent for military intervention in domestic crises. For many, the sight of military vehicles rolling through American neighborhoods was a wake-up call, a reminder that the line between order and oppression can be thin and easily crossed in moments of fear. The two sides weren't just divided on policy, they lived in different realities. Each group saw the other as a threat, not a neighbor. The gulf between them was more than political, it was personal, emotional, and deeply rooted in history. One saw officers under attack, the other saw a community fighting back against injustice. These clashing perspectives fueled a cycle of mistrust and confrontation, making it nearly impossible to find common ground or even speak the same language. There was no common ground, only widening gaps. The physical distance between groups on the street mirrored the emotional and ideological chasms that had opened up across the country. The story of Minneapolis is a warning. Heated rhetoric and dehumanization fuel conflict. When anger becomes the loudest voice, it drowns out the possibility of understanding, and the cycle of outrage continues. Words have power, and in a tense nation it doesn't take much to ignite unrest. A single phrase, a viral video, or a headline can spark a movement or a confrontation. The responsibility to choose words carefully has never been greater. The challenge ahead: can America lower the temperature and rebuild trust? Or is this just the beginning? Healing will require more than policy changes. It will demand empathy, honest dialogue, and a willingness to see each other's humanity. The future depends on whether leaders and citizens can find a way back from the brink. The path forward is uncertain, but the choices made now will shape not just Minneapolis, but the soul of America for generations to come.